Supports and funding for students with disabilities and their families. Some of the greatest minds in history lived with disabilities, including Harriet Tubman, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and Maya Angelou. What if they had grown up in Washington State's public education system as it exists today for children with disabilities? What do students with learning disabilities and their families need today in order to succeed? For many people, it's difficult to step into the shoes of a child living with the challenges associated with disability or to experience what being a parent of a child with a disability is like. Vast inequities exist within Washington's education system, and these gaps will continue to widen without consistent support and funding. In 2019, King 5 News reported on Washington State's special education funding crisis. Washington State only provides funding to support students with disabilities up to a cap of 13.5% of a district's total population. With only an 8% average of support through federal funds, many of our districts are left scrambling to meet the growing demand. Based on data from the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, there is a growing gap between funding and actual expenses for special education. School districts in Washington spend much more than they collect from the state and federal government for special education. Enrollment in special education in Washington State has been increasing since at least 2014, and statewide has been ranging between 14 to 15% each year. During the pandemic, we know that our students with disabilities have been some of the most disenfranchised students in the system. Disability inclusion means including people with disabilities in everyday activities and encouraging them to have roles similar to their peers who do not have a disability. This involves more than simply encouraging people. It requires making sure that adequate policies and practices are in effect in a community or organization. Yet here in Washington State, budget shortfalls have forced school administrators to take resources away from general education budgets in order to stay compliant with federal law, have led some school officials to delay, reduce, and deny eligible children access to special education services, and have played a role in the state's poor special education outcomes. Each state in the U.S. has at least one parent training center, which provides free information to families and kids from birth to age 26 who have a disability. PTIs partner with state education agencies, community organizations, and PTAs to reach parents, students with disabilities, and professionals to improve outcomes for students. Washington State has one parent training and information center and one community parent resource center, with over 140,000 students receiving special education services. How can we advocate and partner in Washington to make sure all families, regardless of where they live and/or what language they speak, have the opportunity to access training, one-to-one support, and online resources? Students with disabilities and their families face many barriers to free and appropriate public educational services. It's time to reimagine a high-quality and fully funded education model for students with disabilities, where parents and families are supported as essential partners in the education and transition to adult life of their children. We know this will be a challenging budget year, and pre-K through 12 education funding is among the most protected from cuts. Washington State PTA advocates that the state continue to take steps to support our students with disabilities and their families by making sure resources, services, and training are available and accessible. Even small changes can reap huge benefits for our most vulnerable students.